Well, I wanted to bring it back to Daniel 9 because I noticed Professing Preterist, good to see you, Preterist. I noticed he made a comment to Olive insinuating that we as futurists ignore the grammatical construction of these passages. There was a specific passage that you both were engaging. And so that made me wonder if Professing Preterist has derived an answer now that it's been a couple weeks since our original discussion on this issue, futurism versus preterism, if he has come up with an answer to the grammar of Daniel 9, specifically 26 and 27 with the he in Daniel 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. The amillennialists on the panel can answer too. He is a pronoun. And so every pronoun goes back to an antecedent. Every pronoun has an antecedent. Professing Preterist in our impromptu debate a couple weeks ago, he agreed that the prince in verse 26, people of the prince, is referring to Titus in 70 AD, and I completely agree. And the people of the prince being the Roman army, because we understand that they came in, they destroyed the city and the sanctuary. That's when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. And so the nearest antecedent to the pronoun he in verse 27 is this prince and not the Messiah. And so I was wondering if he could justify this he in verse 27 as being Messiah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I can do it kind of like, it depends on how you want to do it, because I actually came up with 29 counterpoints to everything that we talked about. So I can go on an entire rampage.
Why don't we start with this one?
Campaign. Okay, we'll start with that one. So I'm going to share my screen. And it's pretty simple, if I'm allowed to, at least, share my screen. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. I know you like charts, right? So I made a little chart for you. And what it does is it breaks down on the left-hand side here, we have Daniel 26. And on the right-hand side, we have Daniel 27. And there's a little line in between that connects every and statement that are in those two verses together. So if you read those two verses parallel to one another, you get, and after the 60 and 2 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. But in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And the people of the prince to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate. And the end of it shall be with a flood, and even until the consummation. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined, and that which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So I can still confidently say that the he is Christ, Messiah.
Are you making a parallelism here? Basically, that there's a parallelism going on in Daniel 9, 26, and 27?
I don't know what I would call it, but I would say if you read it as it's structured out, it makes perfect sense.
It doesn't make any perfect sense because what you just explained doesn't make any sense at all. The he of Daniel 9:27, how are you connecting it back to Messiah rather than the prince in terms of the people of the prince?
Because, okay, if you look at those two verses, right, those two verses are very distinct because each like posit of the verse starts with the word and. So it's saying a series of events, and. But if you look at, so verse 26, right, like I said, everything on the left right here is verse 26 in order. If you read verse 26 in order, this is what it says. If you read verse 27, it does the same thing. It's the same kind of structure, and. So by using basic logical deduction, we can say, well, okay, if they just so happen to both have the same amount of ands connecting one another, then it has to be talking about the Messiah, and he shall confirm a covenant, and the prince of the people, and on the wing of abominations. And the end of it shall be, and even until the consummation, until the end of the war, and that which is determined is poured out. So I fail to see how it can't not be Christ that confirms the covenant. And again, I have 28 other points.
Okay, well, we're sticking with this point. I'm
okay.
trying to make it uninterrupted responses, so I appreciate that. And you should have stopped with I fail to see, because you really do fail to see the fact that the Daniel 9:27 passage is not pointing us back to Messiah. If I could share screen and go over this, because yes, so if, yeah, I'm sharing screen. Perfect. Okay, so you're saying that your argument is demonstrated through basic logic, when basic grammar, as I've already demonstrated, and all of the audience and the panel understood, it wasn't confusing, it wasn't convoluted like your explanation there. Also, the context is important. And so context and grammar, basic context, basic grammar, tells us that the he here, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, goes back to the immediate. It doesn't matter if it says and. Yeah, this is all continuous, starting in verse 25. Actually, verse 24, 70 weeks of years, right, are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city too. And then we have things that need to be accomplished. Finish the transgression, make an end to sins. And this goes back to the already and not yet, because we have Jesus Christ, who conquered spiritually at his first coming. He rules and reigns in the hearts of believers. He also sits at the right hand of the Father. So he rules spiritually, he conquered spiritually. But in the future, he will literally make an end to sins. There will literally be everlasting righteousness. There will literally be reconciliation for iniquity, because Jesus Christ will rule and reign not just in our hearts spiritually, but physically on this earth with us as believers in a glorified state, and therefore literally having no sins. Nobody can say that we don't sin today. Yeah, he made an end to sins because he's the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And so when we believe, our sins, past, present, and future, are forgiven. But we still have this flesh. We're not yet glorified. And that is why there are aspects of this that are future, but have also been fulfilled at the same time in 1st century AD spiritually. Okay, so as we continue, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, unto the Messiah, the Prince, shall be 7 weeks. So we have 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and 1 week. It's broken up. God breaks these 70 weeks up for us. We didn't do it. We're not making things up. He breaks it up. 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and 1 week. Verse 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. So here's the substitutionary atonement, but not for himself. So here is Jesus Christ dying for you, for me, for the world. And the people of the Prince, so the thought is being continued. And the people of the Prince that shall come. So after Jesus is cut off, what this is saying is there's going to be a prince. He is going to have a people, and they are going to destroy the city, specifically Jerusalem, and the temple. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So we've already dealt with the substitutionary atonement and the cutting off of the Messiah, Jesus Christ, in 33 AD. We've dealt with that here. Now we're getting into the events of 70 AD, specifically 66 to 73 AD, with that 7-year Jewish-Roman war. So once we get to verse 27, it's clear that the he goes back to this prince, since that's the nearest antecedent. This is basic grammar. And so it is that prince, who is Titus, that is being referred to, a type or a shadow of the Antichrist. The last thing I want to say, and then take as long as you need to respond, is the context. And so the context we have lined up here, that it is specifically at that time, Antiochus Epiphanes in 2nd century BC. Notice this. Daniel 8 comes right before Daniel 9, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. And so with Antiochus Epiphanes and Antichrist at that time, I say Antichrist because he was literally known as God manifest. You can find coins of him have been unearthed that say God manifest on it, or indicate that he referred to himself as God manifest. He set up a statue of Zeus. He set up an abomination at that time, the transgression of desolation to be specific. He also sacrificed a pig on the altar. And so we see a lot of shadows with Antiochus Epiphanes, a shadow of the future Antichrist. And so the context tells us that this is a man who is taking away the covenant, or who's confirming the covenant and causing the sacrifice and oblation to cease, and not Jesus. And grammar and context both indicate that. So, Preterist, go ahead, take your time.
Okay, well, let's let's strap on in, and I would like to share my screen now if I could, because I'm going to just go ahead and bring up the Bible, and we will go there as needed. So I'll take it point by point with you, man, and I want to make one thing clear. Okay, it's the same thing that I told Charles. I'm not debating anybody. I'm not a debater. Okay, I'm a student. So after our last talk, I told you, I was like, yeah, man, there's some things that you're talking about that just don't make sense. They don't add up to me. And so I appreciated that talk. Don't appreciate a lot of the things that you said. Don't appreciate you trying to treat me like you're a parlor monkey. And I don't appreciate being told that it was a spiritual smackdown, but I do appreciate the talk because I was able to take the information and go and say, okay, let me get myself more studied up so I don't, so I know how to defend the faith. So I'm going to start with my first point, and I'll let you say whatever you want about it. That would be the first thing is going to Daniel. And this is Daniel 8:9. So I'm going to go to Daniel 8 and verse 9. That said, from one of these little horns, a little horn emerged and grew extensively towards the south and the east and toward the beautiful land. What I want to do here is I want to let you know that this little horn is representing an entire kingdom. It's not I know it says him, right? It does say him in Daniel 8. But what I want to do is I'm going to go back to Daniel chapter 2 just to bring context into this.
Can you also make sure you're addressing the grammar, though, that I just went through?
Okay, yeah, we'll take it point by point because I promise that grammar is in here. So if you go to Daniel 2 and 38, this is what he says. The head of gold. I'm sorry. It's probably. Okay, sorry. It's 37. So it's 37 and 38.
Actually, and before you continue, praise, can you, because we're doing uninterrupted responses, but Professing Preterist is taking quite a while. Can you do 2 to 3 minute responses each?
Yeah. I'll do the timekeeping here.
Okay, perfect. 2 to 3 minutes, max.
So according to Daniel 2, 37 and 38, this head of gold represents an entire kingdom of Babylon, but Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, you, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given sovereignty, power, strength, and glory. So he says, you are that head of gold. But we know that it represents an entire kingdom. So the precedence is set there for a single entity to represent an entire kingdom. So that's the end of my first point.
Oh, this is basic stuff, Preterist. Okay, I'm going to restart the timer, 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, so you really didn't address anything. And again, I've experienced this over and over again when I debate Preterists or I debate pre-tribulation rapturists, is even when you give them 2 or 3 weeks to prepare, that they still come with no answers, no answer to the basic grammar and context. Yes, the kings like Nebuchadnezzar, or the kings of Persia and Grecia, and also the end times one world system with Antichrist, they are always distinguished by a king, but also a kingdom. And so Nebuchadnezzar was the king over Babylon, for example. When it comes to the Seleucid Empire in Daniel 8, because we know, unfortunately, for the kingdom of Grecia, Alexander the Great, being a great conqueror, he died prematurely. And because of that, there was no immediate successor. And so the kingdom of Grecia was broken up into 4 sub-kingdoms. And one of those kingdoms was the Seleucid kingdom, or the Seleucid Empire. And so in Daniel 8, this is all confirmed by history. I don't know what Preterist is arguing against here. I mean, this is confirmed through history that Daniel 11 and Daniel 8 have everything to do with Antichrist, or with Antiochus Epiphanes, who is a shadow of the Antichrist. We know that because of 2 Thessalonians 2. We know that because Revelation 13 reiterates a lot of what we see specifically in Daniel 8 and Daniel 11, because Antiochus Epiphanes is a type of Antichrist. And so here, out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. Notice once you get to verse 11, yea, he, because we're talking about a king or a ruler over a kingdom. And so yes, Nebuchadnezzar is that head of gold, okay, because he's the king over Babylon. And so we have Babylon, we have Persia, Medo-Persia to be specific, Grecia, we have Rome, and then obviously we have the end times world system. I'm at 2.5 minutes. So here's the last thing I'll say. And so the he here is referring back to that king of the Seleucid Empire, who is Antiochus Epiphanes. There's no debate here. We understand from history that he did take away the daily sacrifice. He set up a statue of Zeus. He offered up a pig on an altar. We also know that he made a league with unbelieving Jews at that time, apostates, and he worked deceitfully. All things that the Antichrist is going to do. And so when we get to Daniel 9:27, here's the last thing I'll say. I got 10 seconds left. The he, the pronoun he, grammatically goes back to this prince, the people of the prince, who is Titus in 70 AD. It is not Messiah. It is not Jesus. And Titus is again a shadow of the future Antichrist. And I yield.
Okay, so point number 2 that I have is the in Daniel 8:11, we have here that the removing of his daily sacrifice. Okay, well, that word for removal is it's huram is how you would do it, or rum. If we actually look at the original Hebraic text, you see here that that's the word that was specifically used is huram, were taken away. So that word means, it has a connotation of something being stolen or taken away. So that's my second point, so I yield.
Okay, let me restart my timer. Nothing's been addressed yet. Okay, so let's restart. Thanks for all the free points. Okay, so again, back to Daniel 8. Specifically, if you want to look at Daniel 8, verse 5, we have a notable horn that is referring to Alexander the Great, as I pointed out earlier. And that great horn was broken in verse 8. Okay, it's still referring to him who experienced a sudden and unexpected death. Alexander the Great died at a very young age. Apparently, he got drunk, suffered from a fever the next morning, lost his speech, and a few weeks later, he died. And so because of that premature death and a lack of clarity in terms of a true successor, there was a division in the kingdom. And so through that division, we had one specific empire or kingdom, okay, which was the Seleucid kingdom. Again, this is all historical. This is all basic. And so Daniel 8 verses 9, and out of one of them, referring to the Seleucid kingdom, came forth a little horn. And so your entire argument lacks a basic understanding that, yeah, we have kingdoms being mentioned, but there's always a king over that kingdom. Okay. And the Seleucid kingdom or empire is Antiochus Epiphanes. And so everything that Antiochus Epiphanes did in the past is a shadow of what Antichrist does in the future. So let me screen share real quick if I can, and then just let me know when I'm being screen shared, because I like to back up everything I'm saying with the actual scriptures. Okay. So right here, Antiochus Epiphanes, I've got quite a lot of slides here. Okay. So Antiochus Epiphanes, he erected an image of Zeus. We can see here in this source about Antiochus Epiphanes, and going to Emperor Titus with this 7-year Jewish-Roman war, something preterists never deal with. We had a 7-year Jewish-Roman war, 66 to 73, right in the middle of that war. In 70 AD, 3.5 years in, the sacrifice ceased because the temple was destroyed. And so the Jews could no longer physically and literally make animal sacrifices. Okay, here's all the sources for that. Emperor Titus, 70 AD, after he is when he destroyed the temple. So let's go back to Daniel 9, the point in question that Preterist has not addressed. I've got 20 seconds. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Take that pronoun back to the nearest antecedent. Again, the people of the prince, referring to Commander Titus. We know from history, this is a confirmed biblical prediction. This is not even the atheists can address this. So right in the middle of this 7-year war, Commander Titus, the Roman army, they destroyed the temple. And as a result, the sacrifice ceased. That he in Daniel 9:27, there is no justification for taking that he back to Messiah. I yield.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen again and just get right back to this. So next point, point number 3 is Daniel 8:11. Again, I'm going to go to the original Hebraic text, and it says here that the palace of his sanctuary was cast down. So I'm going to take a phrase from your dictionary, SFT, and I'm going to say, don't spiritualize it. That never happened under Antiochus. I yield.
Okay. Still no points addressed, but let's restart the timer, 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, so I am going to share my screen again and go through many of the reasons why, just through the context, there's no way of making the he of Daniel 9:27 the Messiah. History confirms that it's specifically Titus, but remember, the ultimate fulfillment of Daniel 9 cannot actually be Titus. The reason why it is a shadow of the end game. Remember, we have dual and triple prophecy fulfillments. We've got a fulfillment in its immediate context. We've got shadow fulfillments, and then we've got a literal, more dramatic fulfillment in the future, the grand finale. And we read about that in Revelation 13. We understand that Jesus speaks of a future abomination of desolation in Matthew 24, which is after the abomination of desolation in 2nd century BC with Antiochus Epiphanes and his Seleucid Empire. Okay, so with the 7-year Jewish-Roman War and the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, it is only a shadow fulfillment, because in the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, we understand that culminated with what? It culminated with Israel returning to the promised land. So those 70 years concluded with a happy ending. But the 70 weeks, if we were to assume that 70 AD was the only fulfillment, it doesn't end with a happy ending. No, the 70 weeks, though, on the other hand, it ends with the millennial reign, where we have the resurrection. We have believers of all time who literally rule and reign with Jesus Christ for 1,000 years. Okay, so the first 70 years of Babylonian captivity had the children of Israel outside the land with an eventual return. The 70 weeks ends with all believers of all time inheriting the promised land. And so we have a perfect two-part picture of restoration. And to address his argument specifically of Daniel 8, yeah, there are things in Daniel 8 applied to Antiochus Epiphanes. There's no way to deny it. I mean, history confirms that all these things being described. This man literally came out of a kingdom, the Seleucid kingdom. He did all the things that Daniel 8 and specifically Daniel 9 talk about. Okay, now there can be things, since it is ultimately a shadow of things to come in the future, that may not have taken place exactly as described, because there are still aspects of that that will be future. So in my last 20 seconds here, notice the screen. Daniel 8, that little horn, Antiochus Epiphanes, he's taken away the daily sacrifice. Daniel 12, the one who takes away the daily sacrifice is also the one that sets up the abomination of desolation. And I'm here to tell you, folks, Jesus Christ is not setting up an abomination of desolation. I yield.
Amen. Amen.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Let me just get my screen back up. Sorry, I don't.
Man,
wanna-
perfect timing too, SOT. It's like
Yes.
people practiced it.
It was, and I love how this is fantastic. It's a gift.
All right. So going to Daniel 8:13. So Daniel 8:13 is asking, how long will the vision be in regards to the daily offerings and the transgression of desolation, the giving over of both the sanctuary and the host, meaning the army of the peoples of Israel, to be trampled underfoot? So this is actually a direct link to Luke 21:24. So let me go there real quick just to show the audience. Luke 21 and 24, where Christ says here that Jerusalem, so he's identifying Jerusalem, will be trodden down by the Gentiles until that are fulfilled also be the time of the Gentiles. This is also a direct link to Revelation 11, to which we'll get to later. I yield.
Okay, so again, we're in our third or fourth round, and Preterist has not addressed a single point. And I think the audience and the panel can see that. So let me start my timer again, and I will share screen and go over a few things, starting with Antiochus Epiphanes and why he is an obvious foreshadowing or type of Antichrist. And so here I've got the points lined up: Antiochus Epiphanes and the end times Antichrist, the appetizer versus the end game. Antiochus Epiphanes sets up the transgression of desolation. We read about this in Daniel, and we also understand that this was the case through history. Okay, he took away the daily sacrifice. Antichrist is going to take away the daily sacrifice in the future. 2 Thessalonians 2 talks about the man of sin being revealed. He stands in the temple. He claims to be God. People are going to worship him as God. Revelation 13 has him setting up an abomination of desolation, except this time the image can speak. The image with Antiochus Epiphanes, the image of Zeus, couldn't speak. And it also wasn't the case that everybody who did not worship the image would be killed. And there also wasn't a mark instituted worldwide that whoever didn't take it would be killed and couldn't buy or sell, specifically buy or sell, because there are aspects that are future. Because we have the appetizer versus the end game. Remember, this is the little horn that came out of the Grecian period. Preterist came in with what he thought was a strong argument. Oh, it's talking about a kingdom. We see all throughout Scripture, especially in Bible prophecy, that yes, we have a king who's associated with a kingdom. The beast in the end times, that one world system, is also the Antichrist, because the Antichrist is the king over that system. He is the leader, the one world leader. Antiochus Epiphanes was the leader of the Seleucid Empire. Notice the end times Antichrist, same thing. He's doing all the same things, and it fits perfectly with Daniel 9:27 and the he. Preterist still hasn't addressed the grammar. Notice here, Daniel 11. He, referring to Antiochus Epiphanes, just hit the 2-minute mark, shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. This was confirmed. They unearthed coins of Antiochus Epiphanes where they had literally depicted him as God manifest. The Bible tells us that Jesus Christ is God manifest in the flesh. And so Antiochus Epiphanes is the perfect type of Antichrist. He is the 2nd century BC. And here's the thing. Yes, it seems repetitive, but this world works in cycles. There's nothing new under the sun. And so there are necessary cycles throughout the history of this planet that need to take place in order for these things to be fulfilled. Look at 2 Thessalonians 2, speaking of the Antichrist. This is after Antiochus Epiphanes, and it talks about the man of sin who opposeth and exalteth himself, just like Antiochus Epiphanes, above all that is called God or all that is worshipped. That's 3 minutes. I'll address the times of the Gentiles in the next round.
Okay.
Amen.
All right. I'm going to share my screen again. My next point being Daniel 8:14. So it says that the time will be 2,300 days and evenings, and then the sanctuary will be made righteous. This word for then it shall be cleansed, it is speaking to be made just or righteous. So if that happened under Antiochus, that would mean that it would have to be a 6 1/4 year span of time of the temple being defiled, which never happened. Also, being made righteous is denoted in Revelation. That's going to be chapter 19 and verse 2. And this is when Christ is judging Old Covenantal Jerusalem, which ties right back into the sanctuary being made righteous, because it's talking about the temple. But you see here that he says, for true and righteous are the judgments of him, because he has judged the prostitute great. He's talking about Old Covenantal Jerusalem. This is the mystery Babylon. I yield.
Okay, let me restart my timer. So what Preterist is doing here, the audience, the panel can see, is every new point that he brings up is refuted, and then he just he's lacking critical thinking skills here. He's not even addressing or engaging my points. He still hasn't addressed the grammar, and he still hasn't addressed the contextual based arguments for the he in Daniel 9:27 being Antichrist, specifically Titus in terms of its 70 AD fulfillment, but the future Antichrist, and I've demonstrated it can't be missed. Antiochus Epiphanes does all the same things that the future Antichrist will do. Okay,
but this isn't surprising though that he can't do that.
Right. Well, it's an indefensible position, both partial and full preterism. So the times of the Gentiles, right here on the screen. Okay, Luke 21:23 talks about wrath upon this people. Remember, we have the usage of the second person plural pronoun, third person plural pronouns in Luke 21, Matthew 24, Mark 23, or Mark 13, where Jesus is referring to Christians in the second person, and then he's referring to national Israel or the unbelieving Jews in the third person. And that's why we see in Luke 21:23 at this point, wrath is upon this people, referring to national Israel. This is actually when Jerusalem is trodden down of the Gentiles or the nations until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. So what is the times of the Gentiles? Well, scripture tells us, Revelation 11:2, for it is given unto the Gentiles and the holy city, from our vantage point temporally, right? I hear a lot of background noise. Please mute whoever it is. Revelation describes that holy city spiritually as Sodom and Egypt, okay? But from this vantage point, the world sees Jerusalem as that holy city, right? Shall they tread underfoot 40 and 2 months? We also know Antichrist continues in power for 40 and 2 months. Where did that happen in 70 AD? Where did any of this happen in 70 AD? It didn't. Okay, so what we see here is a time, Zechariah 14 also describes how God, it says, I will bring the nations to battle against Jerusalem. And so we have a time where the Antichrist, in the same way that Antiochus Epiphanes did, he makes a league or an agreement or a covenant with many, but he works deceitfully. Okay, he's not actually going about this deal the right way. He's working deceitfully. He's being dishonest. And so what happens is he steps foot in the temple. This is the abomination of desolation. This is what we see in 2 Thessalonians 2. His armies come in, the armies of the Antichrist, the armies of this one world system, and they destroy Jerusalem. They take it over essentially, and it's trodden down of his armies until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled, 40 and 2 months. So basically until the battle in Armageddon, when Jesus Christ comes on a white cloud, and what? The millennial reign begins, the 1,000-year period. This is all, yes, there was shadows of this in 70 AD, but the major portions of this is future. It doesn't help the preterist case. I yield.
Okay. So in regards to touching your points, I can promise you I'm going to. I don't know. I don't really want to jump around. I just want to take it point by point, if that's okay. So I'm going to go to share my screen again, and I'm going to go to the next point, point number 6, which is going to be Daniel 8 and verse 17. And it says here, "So he came near where I stood, and when he came I was afraid and fell on my face. But he said to me, 'Understand, son of man, that to the time of the end the vision refers.'" Period. This isn't talking about a partial fulfillment of the time of the end. So if you were to posit that Daniel 8 happened, then you have to admit that the time of the end happened. And that, my friend, would make you a preterist anyway. I yield.
Okay, thank you, preterist. I'll start my timer and share screen. So I've already demonstrated to everybody, and just because you don't want to see it doesn't mean everybody else isn't seeing it, that we have shadows all throughout Daniel 8, all throughout Daniel 11.
Your screen's not being shared.
Oh, Praise, can you share my screen, please? We have shadows all throughout Daniel 8. And I see that my screen's not shared yet, but Praise, whenever you're there. Oh, perfect. So we see all throughout Daniel 8, and no worries, and 11, shadows. I've already gone through. I spent 3 minutes going over the things that Antiochus Epiphanes did. He was known as God manifest, sacrificed a pig on the altar, set up an abomination of desolation, took away the daily sacrifice. He was against the holy people. He made a league. He made an agreement. He made a covenant. Everything Antichrist does or did is also described as the end times Antichrist that we read about in 2 Thessalonians 2, Matthew 24, Revelation 13. Preterists lack an important understanding in dual and triple prophecy fulfillment. All throughout scriptures, we see immediate fulfillments, like with Abraham when he was offering up his son Isaac on the altar. God said, "I will provide myself a lamb." What was provided in its immediate context? It was a ram. But in the future, it was literally the lamb, Jesus Christ, slain from the foundation of the world that was offered up for the sins of the world. Adam and Eve were told, if they eat of this tree, they shall surely die. When they ate of the tree and sin was brought into this world, did they die right there and then? No, but they died spiritually. Because we have spiritual fulfillments followed by more literal, physical or dramatic fulfillments. And so years and years later, eventually they died physically too. So we had a spiritual fulfillment and a physical fulfillment. It's all throughout scriptures. It can't be missed. And so, yes, there are portions of Daniel 8 that would be referring to the end times, as in the future that Revelation talks about. Okay. And so notice here, verse 11, he, referring to Antiochus Epiphanes, he took away the daily sacrifice. He was against the daily sacrifice, so on and so forth. And it also talks about the 2,300 days. Well, history actually tells us, and a lot of preterists and historicists, they have to cook the books. It tells us that the 2,300 days was actually a little bit shorter than that. So it says, "And he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." History tells us that's not really the case. And yeah, they try and cook the books and make it fit, but it doesn't work. And so rightfully, I believe the 2,300 days applies to the future. And then when you map out the timeline with 1,260 days, 1,335, 1,290, 42 months, 3.5 years, 2,300 days, it fits perfectly. Where you've got a 7-year period, and at the end of that period, you have the millennial reign. And then it fits like a glove. I yield.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen again real quick. And I'm going to go to my next point, which is Daniel 8:19. And it says that this vision regards to, quote, what shall happen in the latter time of the indignation, for at the appointed time the end shall be. Now, this latter time is actually a huge prepositional issue for any kind of partial fulfillment or future fulfillment, because it's referencing the same latter days in as Deuteronomy 4:30. So I want to go there real quick just to show the context of that. In Deuteronomy 4, verse 30. When in distress you are, and come upon you all these things in the latter days, and when you turn to Yahuwah your God and obey his voice. Now, this is also the same latter days as spoken of in Deuteronomy 31:29. So I'm going to go there real quick. 31 and 29. And this is what he says. And this is Moses, right, is giving this speech right before he gives the Song of Moses, which also poses a huge problem for any futurist, because the Song of Moses is directly mentioned in Revelation 15. But anyway, it says, For I know that after my death, because you will become utterly corrupt and turn aside from the way which I have commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, because you will do evil in the sight of Yahuwah to provoke him to anger through the work of your hands. So this latter days of Daniel 8:19 is not a partial fulfillment of the latter days. It's all, the Bible is a very cohesive story of what is going to happen to Israel in the latter days, and that all culminates in 70 AD with the destruction of the temple, and therefore the complete severing and the nullification of the old covenantal system of worship, thus ushering in the new covenant. And so I yield my time.
Okay, I'll restart my timer. And so what I see here is a lot of assertions, a lot of claims of what he believes, and I appreciate that. I appreciate him telling us what he believes, but he's not actually engaging my points. He's not actually engaging the scriptures and the arguments, whether it's arguments from grammar, arguments from context. He is just repeating common preterist talking points, unfortunately. So let me screen share, and let me know, I guess, when I'm screen shared. I'm going to go over the ending part of Daniel 8 for now. Okay, I appreciate it. I don't know how anybody can deny. And as you can see, he's not even attempting to engage the arguments for why Daniel 8 and 11 are Antiochus Epiphanes, who does all the same things that the future Antichrist does. So yes, I've already given several examples of dual and triple prophecy fulfillment. We read about it in transgression of desolation. Another word for transgression is abomination. In 2nd century BC with Antiochus Epiphanes and specifically the Seleucid Empire. Then Jesus talks about an abomination of desolation in Matthew 24. Well, sorry to break it to you, that's after Antiochus Epiphanes. And then we read in Revelation 13 about an abomination of desolation where we have this great image set up that can speak, and if people don't worship it, they'll be killed. We see the mark of the beast. We see this one world system. And so there's dual and triple prophecy fulfillment right there. If there's an analog in the New Testament, we know that it is a shadow of things to come. And we see analogs all throughout the New Testament, okay? Daniel 8 has analogs in the New Testament. Daniel 9, Daniel 11, that's how Daniel 12. That's how we know that these are shadows of things to come. And so yes, everything in Daniel 8 for the most part happened. Everything in Daniel 11 when it talks about, you know, the king over here, the king over there, how they're fighting each other, going to war, and then it talks about this leader making a league with many, so on and so forth. That all happened in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes and the Maccabean revolt. Okay? But there are aspects of that that are also future, whether it's just a shadow of things to come, but we see this all throughout scripture, can't be missed. Okay, so notice this. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation. But no, isn't this an amazing fulfilled prophecy of Alex, all before it happened? Atheists can't address this. The Bible predicts Alexander the Great, predicts his fall, and predicts how Grecia is broken up into 4 kingdoms. But notice this, and in the latter time of their kingdom, history confirms this, okay? Somebody who understands dark sentences, he stands up. His power shall be mighty, not by his own power, just like the Antichrist in the end times. He's given his power by the dragon. Antiochus Epiphanes is influenced by Satan as well. And it talks about everything to do with Antiochus Epiphanes here. And it is just a perfect shadow or type of the future Antichrist. And so the preterists, they just have to deny shadow fulfillments. They have to deny dual and triple prophecy fulfillments, unfortunately. But as people can see here, fits beautifully.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share my screen again and going to go to the last part of Daniel 8 that I'm going to touch on, which is Daniel 8 and 26. So it says here that the vision and the timing, right? So the timing of the 2300 days is true, and that Daniel should seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. Well, if we go to Revelation 22 and verse 6, this is about the new Jerusalem, the new heavens and new earth. And it says here, and he said to me, these words are faithful and true. And the Lord of the God of spirits of the prophets sent his angel to show his servants the things that must soon, okay, taki, soon come to pass. And he said to me, so we're going to go to the next verse here. This is going to be verse 10. And he says to me, right, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of the book of this, for the time is near. I yield.
Okay, let me restart the timer. So again, Preterist here doesn't understand that, yes, when it comes to these prophecies, just like in the book of Revelation, there were things, like, for example, with the churches spoken of in Revelation 2 and 3, where events, persecutions, tribulations happened to them in that time. And so there were events that happened quickly after the book was written. But then there's also events that happen in the future. But there is always a sense of urgency in the scriptures when it comes to Bible prophecy. Like we read about the day of the Lord, where the sun and moon go dark, stars fall from heaven, powers of the heavens shall be shaken. We see many, many days of the Lord, because God wants every single generation of believers to have that sense of urgency that the last days are just around the corner, because that promotes preparation, that promotes believer preparedness. It promotes an urgency to repent, to get people saved. Okay, and so that's why that kind of language is used for at least 2 reasons: for repentance, every generation, for national conversion, national repentance, but also for the fact that, yeah, we have immediate and shadow fulfillments, many, many days of the Lord, but then one big day of the Lord in the end times, right before God's wrath period. Okay, so I'm going to share a screen real quick and go over another example as to why, yes, when we read Daniel 8, when we read Daniel 11, just like when God said to Abraham, I will provide myself for a ram. Preterist here, if he didn't have that analog in the New Testament, which is also past for us, where Jesus Christ actually died, was buried, and rose again for the sins of the world. He was the lamb slain, God manifests in the flesh, God providing himself for a lamb. He would have thought that the ram, that's it at that time with Abraham, because that's what was offered up at that time, was a ram. But it was future that we had the main event, We had an appetizer with the ram, but in the future, we had the lamb, literally Jesus Christ, God manifest in the flesh, okay? So when we read about these events with Antiochus Epiphanes, specifically in Daniel 8, we read about them in Daniel 11, we see aspects of Daniel 12 that are future, okay? Like future as spoken of in Revelation. Those are localized. Even when Christ came the first time, we had a localized one world government with Rome. Jesus Christ conquered spiritually. Okay. But in Revelation 13, notice the Antichrist makes war with the saints to overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds, all tongues, all nations, and all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him. And so now we've gone from localized events to events that are global in scope, that are universal in scope. And that's why it is so important to understand the significance of your appetizers that we see all throughout Scripture, and then your main event in the end times. And so it is ridiculous. Here's the last thing I'll say, because I'm coming up at 3 minutes. It is ridiculous to say that all of these events spoken of in Revelation, hail and fire cast upon the earth, mountain cast into the sea, one world system with a one world leader, smoke and locusts out of the bottomless pit, these armies of angels, Satan bound in the bottomless pit and sealed. It is ridiculous to say that this has all occurred. It hasn't occurred. And that's why preterists can't actually give us historical documentation of these events taking place. They have to over-allegorize and over-spiritualize all of these passages. I yield.
So it's a giving of the 70 weeks of years, which is 490 years. And Messiah is said to come on the 69th week, right? That's what this is clearly saying. Now, in Daniel 9:26, it does say this, though. After the weeks 60 and 2 shall be cut off Messiah, but not for himself. So why is the 7 weeks or the 49 years missing from there, right? Now, that's because it would be a Jubilee year. And in Luke 4, so I'm going to jump there really quick. Jesus reads, and I'm going to actually go into the Berean Study Bible here. So in Luke 4, Jesus begins his ministry when he starts, actually it's here in verse 16 through 20. So what he's doing is he reads from Isaiah 61 and decrees that he had began the year of the Lord's favor, which is this Jubilee period, or 49 years. Now, this is in fulfillment of Leviticus 25 and 26. So if we go to Leviticus 25, you see here that this is the 7th year and the year of the Jubilee, and it's supposed to be the return of property, the blessing of obedience, and the laws of redemption, all that stuff. And Leviticus 26, which is also talking about the punishments, God remembers those who repent. Perfect. So that's a fulfillment of that. Now, when he reads from Isaiah 61, he's doing what's called metalepsis, okay? So metalepsis has to be a real thing. And what it is when a person of the New Testament was reciting part of a passage, they're invoking the entirety of that passage into account. And it has to be true. Otherwise, when Christ is on the cross and he recites the first part of Psalm 22, where he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? If he wasn't invoking the entirety of Psalm 22, that would mean that he wasn't fulfilling Psalm 22. He was only fulfilling what? My God, why have you forsaken me? So, that is just proof to metalepsis. But anyway, Isaiah 61 and 1 says that he's there to proclaim liberty to the captives. And that fulfills Deuteronomy 15. I'm trying to go as fast as I can here. There's a lot in this one. So Deuteronomy 15, 12
You've got 20 seconds.
12 through 18 talks about doing proclaiming liberty to captives. Hebrews 3:18 also touches on entering his rest, which is referencing the Jubilee rest, because at the end of it, the new covenant would be established and Christ would be the eternal Sabbath. And in Hebrews 4:11, Paul states that the first century Jews were to, quote, make every effort to enter that rest, which would be the culminating of the year of the Lord's favor, which happened in 70 AD.
Okay, let me restart my timer. And I feel that last response was a bit all over the place, convoluted, and did not, again, address Daniel 9 in the grammar and the context, which is what I've been waiting to see addressed. And Praise, if you could share my screen real quick, because I want to show the audience just how simple this is. Yeah, there we go. So again, we've already shown the nature of dual and triple prophecy fulfillments. Here's a bunch of examples that I've gone over, but here's the visuals for you. Genesis 22, same thing. God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. In that time, the immediate fulfillment, not an exact fulfillment, was a ram. Okay? We have an immediate physical fulfillment and then a future spiritual fulfillment where Jesus Christ, literally God manifest in the flesh, provided himself. We see the same thing with Jonah. We see dual prophecy fulfillment with the day of the Lord, right? Just right here, we see many, many days of the Lord, but with still a future day of the Lord to come. And so the immediate fulfillments, the shadow fulfillments, are not always exact fulfillments. Or even if they are exact, like mostly what we see in Daniel 11 and 8 with Antiochus Epiphanes, it's fulfillment on a localized manner. It's fulfillment not global in scale like we would see in the future. Again, this world works in cycles, and there's nothing new under the sun. Okay, there's prophetic cycles, and so we see the same thing with Christ's return. Jesus came the first time. He spiritually defeated death and hell. He set up a spiritual kingdom on this earth during the Roman Empire. In the end times, we'll see an exact fulfillment of this where he is literally ruling and reigning physically. This time, it will literally be a global government where this one world leader is ruling over the known world. Okay? So again, Daniel 9, we read about a man, the pronoun he, which goes back to the people of the prince, making a covenant. Do we see Antiochus Epiphanes making a covenant, this type of Antichrist? Yes. Notice, what is a covenant? It's a deal. It's a league. It's an agreement. What do we see in Daniel 11, verse 23? And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully. That is exactly what we see in Daniel 9, where this covenant is broken. It's broken in the middle of the week. And we see in the middle of the 7-year Jewish-Roman war in 70 AD, 66 to 73, Titus, the Roman army, come in, destroy the temple, destroy the city, and the sacrifice stops. The Jews can no longer offer up sacrifices because their temple is destroyed. And so here's the last thing I'll say, going over to Daniel 9:27. It's simple. It doesn't have to be convoluted like Preterist is making it here. Okay, the he is a pronoun. It goes back to an antecedent, the people of the prince. Preterist even agrees that that is speaking of Titus in 70 AD. Titus, just like Antiochus Epiphanes, is a shadow of the future Antichrist. We read about the future Antichrist also setting up an abomination of desolation. He's a one world leader. He claims to be God. He does all the same things that Antiochus Epiphanes does. It fits like a glove. Grammar proves Preterist wrong. History proves Preterist wrong. And context proves Preterist wrong.
Okay, so I'm going to be in Daniel 9:27 now. Actually, here, let me share this first before I start. I'm going to share again this little picture thing that I have here. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry. It's not. Why is it not pulling it up? I don't know why it's not pulling it up. Hold on. My little chart
10-point
thing.
deduction.
I know. I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding.
I'm trying to make it. Oh, here we go. Here it is. Okay. So
Take your time on this one because I've got a fairly large bug on my ceiling that's distracting me. I need to kill it. So it'll take a couple minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, so Daniel 9:26 to 27 is where this entire posit of semi-fulfillment kind of comes in, but the explanation is very clear. The entirety of the Bible, the entirety of it, is a single flowing testament to the supremacy of God. Last time we had this discussion, you even believed and agreed, I should say, that chapters, chapter breaks, verses, and punctuation were added way after the fact for our convenience. So with that being said, as I broke down how this sentence goes, we even talked about it last time where you were like, well, if I say that Charles is good at football, he just scored a goal, you would have to know that I'm talking about Charles. And I said, well, yes, that would be true. However, there's two people in context here in Daniel 26. So if I were to say Charles and praise like football, he just got a score, you would have to bring into question, well, who just got a score? There's two people being brought into account here. Now, with that being said, there's, as the chart shows, there's really no way that Messiah isn't the one who confirms a covenant. But here's the even more illogical part of your argument. This covenant is not made. It is confirmed. And to confirm something means that it has to be something that is spoken of previously. On top of that, only God can make covenant with his creation. And to top that off, covenants have to have stated constituent elements to be a covenant. Daniel 9:27 does not distinguish what this covenant is because it is already known. It's the Abrahamic covenant that was already promised. So Christ was confirming that covenant and would ultimately bring it into its conception in 70 AD. I yield.
Okay, so I've dealt with this argument many times. I dealt with it specifically in my debate with Jamie Russell. When it comes to making leagues, when it comes to making covenants, praise if you could share my screen. Okay, there is oftentimes a lead up. There is oftentimes preliminary agreements. Anybody who's sold anything in their life understands that there's a lot of negotiating going on when it comes to big deals, when it comes to agreements. Okay, and so yes, we get that handshake, we get that firm agreement, we get that confirming going on in Daniel 9:27. It fits perfectly the timeline with Daniel's 70th week in this 7-year end times period where we actually have the first seal. A man is going forth to conquer. And so we have a shift in geopolitics. And what typically happens as a result of that? World war. And that's what we see in the second seal. What is a ripple effect of world war? Famine and starvation. Massive worldwide death. We see that in the third and fourth seal. The fifth seal in Revelation 6, we see martyrs appearing in heaven. But the point is, in the middle of this week, after this agreement is made, after this league is made, what do we have? We have the sacrifice and oblation ceasing. We have that agreement basically being the one making the agreement goes against it. Okay. And so that's where I wanted to go to my slides here on, again, covenant. Anybody can, a covenant, another word for covenant is agreement. It's a league. Okay. Maccabees, not that it's any kind of authority, Maccabees has a description of Antiochus Epiphanes and the Maccabean revolt. And as history confirms, notice this, let us go and make a covenant, because we understand that the apostate Jews at that time, the ones that did not want to worship the one true God, they actually decided to go against God's people, the true believers, and make a league or a covenant with Antiochus Epiphanes, who hated God. He was coming up against God and God's holy people, the true believers. And so we see a description of that here. Okay, so anybody can make an agreement, anybody can make a covenant. This argument is so bad that the preterists and the historicists use. Yes, there's a lot of preliminary aspects of making a covenant or making an agreement. That handshake, that firm handshake where the covenant is confirmed, that is what we see in Daniel 9:27. And it can't be missed. The grammar demonstrate this is the fact, and so does the context. Daniel 8, and by him, by who? The little horn, the sacrifice was stopped, was taken away. Okay, I yield.
Okay. So I'm going to touch on 2 and 1 here real quick. So first thing I want to touch on, you need to note that the bringing an end to sacrifice and offering part in Daniel 9:27, this word is yasbit, which it means to actually cease something. So this word is much different than the stealing or taking away or the hurum of the other verses that speak of this. So this is much different context. Now to go forward with that, I want to move into Daniel 11. So Daniel 11 is something that you had brought up, and I want you to I want to make it clear that Daniel 11 cannot be a partial fulfillment, because as was stated previously, there is no such thing as partial fulfillments in the Bible. But even more so, let's break down some logical factors of this chapter if it has to do with this partial fulfillment. So in verse 20, okay, it says that there is one who will arise who shall send out a tax collector for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he will be destroyed, though not in anger or in battle. So this couldn't have been Antiochus, because it says that they were destroyed within a couple days. And then in his place, there's someone else who's destroyed in verse 26. So those who eat from his provisions will seek to destroy him. His army will be swept away, and many will fall slain. So it just, like, this isn't making any sense from like, it's a partial thing that partially happened under Antiochus. So I yield.
Okay, I'm hoping that what I just heard, Preterist just misspoke, but he can correct himself in the next round. Let me restart my timer. Praise, my brother, please share my screen. We're going to go to Daniel 11. Okay, firstly, there are partial fulfillments where the immediate fulfillment is not exact. And I've already shown many examples of this. I am not going to re-show them. But again, in Genesis, Abraham sacrificed a ram. But the prophecy had to do with a lamb. That was future. So we had an immediate fulfillment that was not exact. But in the future, we had a more the literal fulfillment. The fulfillment in its entirety with the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Same thing when Adam and Eve sinned. They died spiritually right away. That was the immediate fulfillment. In the future, they died physically. That was a literal, more dramatic fulfillment in the future. Okay. So notice here, Antiochus Epiphanes is not spoken of until, notice, we have these battles between these various kings. We have many events taking place here in Daniel 11 that are confirmed through history. Okay. I talk a lot about this in my book. But for sake of time, we'll go down to verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes. Here's another leader in the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days, he shall be destroyed. That he is not Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes comes in after. And in his estate shall stand up a vile person. Now we're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. To whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, and he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom through flatteries. Yes, we have in this instant an example of a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Everything about Daniel 11 was fulfilled. It is all in the past, but it was fulfilled in a localized manner. The fulfillment was not global in scope. That is why the things that Antiochus Epiphanes did, the Antichrist in the future is also described as doing. And so everything, or at least most of the details in Daniel 11, will happen again. Yes, it happened in the past, and it's going to happen again because the world works that way. There are prophetic cycles. It is repetitive because these cycles need to come about in order to fulfill Bible prophecy. This is the way God works. There's nothing new under the sun. And so this man here, notice, he comes in peaceably, just like the Antichrist. He comes in, he makes claims of peace. The world gives him power. We get a one world system, one world government. The world loves it. The unbelieving world loves it. They love the mark of the beast, this one world system. But it is the plan of the dragon, the false prophet, and the Antichrist to persecute true believers, Christians. And this is what Antiochus Epiphanes did as well. He made a deal with apostate Jews at this time. He came in peaceably. He obtained the kingdom through flatteries, and then he overthrew it. He killed the prince of the covenant, okay, after the league made with him. So he made a league. He made it a covenant. He shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peaceably. So you can go through this all yourself. This is all talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes is the one who made the league. He is the one that came in peaceably. He is the one. Notice this. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself, just like the future Antichrist, and magnify himself above every god. He is the one that set up the statue of Zeus. He is the one that history tells us did all these things. So again, I'll say it again. History, grammar, and context refutes preterist tonight. I yield.
Okay, so going back into Daniel 11. So verse 31 here, I'm going to go to the original Hebraic. And it says here that the forces of this king shall defile the sanctuary fortress. And the verse uses the word that stems from the Hebraic word sir, which translates to then they shall take away the daily sacrifices. This one right here. This says, then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and shall place the abomination of desolation. This denotes that there's a period of time between all three of these events happening, right? So defiling the sanctuary, then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place the abomination of desolation. So this is three different time periods where these things kind of happen. And moreover, it specifies that the forces of this king will be the ones who take away the daily sacrifices, not this supposed Antichrist character himself. And this word here for take away, it has sir in there, which denotes they, but it also still stems from that word huram, which is different from the yasbit of Daniel 9:27. I yield.
All right, here we go. More arguments that I've already refuted with Jamie, with Chris Lucas. It'd be nice if Preterists would have watched some of my video series, read my book, watched my debates on this. So let me refute this argument too. And I think we've been going at this for a while. So we're going to wrap it up after this round, as it is getting late for me. And I still haven't seen any response to my challenge on the grammar, the context, the history of Daniel 9 specifically. Okay, so Daniel 11, yes, this is more evidence for what I'm saying. I covered this last time. An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice. This correlates beautifully with Daniel 9, as you're going to see. And they, just like Preterist was talking about, shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. So the ones who take away the daily sacrifice are also the ones who set up the abomination of desolation. Jesus is not setting up an abomination of desolation. Notice how it says they shall pollute the sanctuary. Well, this correlates with verse 26 of Daniel 9. Preterists love to isolate verses and ignore the context. Remember, we need to read Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9, Daniel 10, 11, 12. So many preterists, like Gary DeMar, he'll say, where does the Antichrist ever make a covenant? It's like, well, in Daniel 11, he makes a league. A league is another word for covenant. History tells us he made a league. He made a covenant. Okay, the pronoun, the immediate antecedent to the pronoun in Daniel 9:27, it's the people of the prince. We understand that the people of the prince are the Roman army, and that is a they. And so notice this, 26. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. See, why do the preterists want to extend this beautiful, fulfilled prophecy of the substitutionary atonement of Jesus Christ into verse 27? Verse 27, we're now talking about events that are occurring after this fulfilled prophecy. We've already read about Messiah being cut off. They make the same prophecy twice. It's redundant. No. Verse 27 is another beautiful fulfillment with that 7-year Jewish-Roman war. Right in the middle of that war in 70 AD, the city's destroyed, the temple's destroyed, the sacrifice literally stops, and it's all a shadow of the end times. That's the more sophisticated explanation. That's the true explanation. So notice this. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. In this verse, Daniel 9:26, we have the people of the prince, plural. It's not just Commander Titus coming in or just the Antichrist coming in. No, remember the times of the Gentiles, the time when Jerusalem is going to be trodden down underfoot of the Gentiles, of the nations, of his armies. You have a leader, a one world leader with the Antichrist. We have Antiochus Epiphanes as well in 2nd century BC, or Titus, where he's got his Roman army. He's the king or the leader or the commander over many. Okay, and so in 70 AD, when that temple and city is destroyed, it's not just Commander Titus going in saying, listen, boys, you stay over here. I got this. No, it's the army going in. The one in command is Titus. Okay, and so one could say, yeah, he's the one that took away the daily sacrifice in 70 AD, even though the army is the one who destroyed it. So notice this, destroying the city and the sanctuary. Those people referring to the Roman army under the command of Titus between 66 and 73. And in the end times, it's the Antichrist armies. The fact that it says they in both Daniel 9 and 11 precludes the he of Daniel 9:27 as being Jesus Christ. Because in Daniel 9, we have the people of the prince. That's plural. But then we also have singular prince because the prince has an army. In the future, we have the Antichrist, singular. He also has an army. In that time, it'll be a one world government army. And so those nations come in and they take over, and Antichrist rules from national Israel. I yield.
Okay. So I know you said that it's getting late, so you have to go. I do want to just touch on 3 things then, because I'm about halfway through with all my points, but we can maybe get to them a different day. So I want to get back to Daniel 11:32. Okay, so just real quick, in this verse, I don't know if I'm sharing. Is it being shared? Oh, thank you. So in this verse, it does say that he will corrupt with a flattering lip those who do wickedly against the covenant. Well, my question would be, which covenant? It can't be this supposed Antichrist covenant, because that would mean that he would flatter the same people who were corrupting the covenant that he made. It's illogical. And it even goes on to say, but the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. So you have to try and justify what this covenant is, because if it's the covenant he makes in Daniel 9, we got a big logical problem. Second of all, this entire chapter...
Well, let's talk about the Old Testament covenant. The Prince of the Covenant there is talking about the high priest at that time in Israel. It's referring to the Old Testament covenant.
Okay, so then if this is supposed to be a future fulfillment, what covenant is he going to be doing corrupting?
I've already pointed out that Daniel 11, all of it has occurred. It's in the past.
Oh, okay, you think it's all past. Okay, well, the problem with that is this entire chapter talks about the time of the end multiple times, and there's only one
because
time.
Because there's an application for the end because we have a localized fulfillment that has everything to do with the Maccabean revolt. It has everything to do with Antiochus Epiphanes. It has everything to do with his war against the one true God and his holy people back in 2nd century BC. He set up an image. That image couldn't speak, though. It was an image of Zeus. He took away the sacrifice. He sacrificed a pig on the altar. He made a league. He came in peaceably. He took the kingdom through flatteries. He went against it. He worked deceitfully. And so it's all the same things that the Bible describes in the New Testament. Remember, there's an analog to the New Testament. It's all the same things that are described for the Antichrist. And so we have an appetizer with Antiochus Epiphanes, and then we have the main event or the end game with the Antichrist. And that's why I had a slide breaking it down perfectly for you to see, for everybody to see, where I had Antichrist on one side and Antiochus Epiphanes on the other, appetizer versus main event, and I listed all the things that they both do. Antichrist did, I should say, and Antichrist will do. And so, yes, it all occurred in a localized manner, but there is an end times application because there is an analog in the New Testament.
Okay, so the thing about those, you just said, yes, all of Daniel 11 was fulfilled. But then you're like, but it's an appetizer, but it's very confusing because it literally says the time of the end, and there's only one time of the end. There can't be more than one time of the end. And just to end on this note, getting into chapter 12, it's a literal continuation of chapter 11 because it starts out with at that time. Well, at what time? That would be at the time of the end. And this is resurrection language. So now you're having to say, how many resurrections are there? Donny, how many times of the end are there? There's no logic to the argument of types and shadows of fulfillment. There's no types and shadows of fulfillments of the time of the end. There's only types and shadows of Christ. Yes, things point to Christ in the Old Testament, but the time of the end is one specific designated time that is cut out, and those 70 weeks of years are what are determined for your people and your city, which is the old covenantal Israel and Jerusalem. So, I mean, I just want you to tell me how many time of the ends are there and how many resurrections of the dead are there?
Well, there's one time of the end that we have not yet reached. There is the resurrection of the dead, those that did good, those that did evil, at the great white throne judgment. That hasn't occurred yet. There are end times applications in passages like Daniel 11 and Daniel 8, where everything described in those passages dealing with Antiochus Epiphanes has occurred. But again, the world works in cycles. There are prophetic cycles. There's nothing new under the sun. And so God works in cycles to bring about the ultimate fulfillment. Share my screen real quick. I just wanted to show the audience something as we wrap things up. But I will say, Preterist, this has been a fun discussion, and I would leave it up to the audience to watch in its entirety and pay close attention to my slideshow presentations on dual and triple prophecy fulfillment, showing the reality of a shadow fulfillment oftentimes with a literal, more dramatic fulfillment. With the abomination of desolation, we see dual and triple prophecy fulfillment with the abomination of desolation. Praise, if you can share my screen real quick, brother. I just wanted to leave the audience with what I believe is one of the greatest examples of fulfilled prediction in Scripture, where we have this 7-year Jewish-Roman war. I still feel like Preterist, and we'll give you, to be fair, you've been a good sport. We're going to give you the last word after this before we wrap it up. Preterist. Okay, so Daniel 9:27, and he. So it goes back to this pronoun, he. I also find it amazing that when you actually study out Revelation, you compare it with Daniel, specifically Daniel 9, 8, and 11, we see that Antichrist continues in power for 42 months. We see 1,260 days, 1,290 days, 3.5 years, all aspects of a 7-year period, but it's right in the middle of that 7-year period where Antichrist continues in power for 42 months. And yet it's right in the middle of this week this 7-year period, that the he, going back to the people of the prince, that specific prince, actually destroys the temple, destroys the city, takes away the sacrifice. From 66 to 73 AD. And what do we know from history? The first Jewish-Roman war, as you can see in my slides here, 66 to 73 AD. Emperor Titus, 70 AD. Notice this. On June 5th, 70 AD, during the siege of Jerusalem, Titus and his Roman legions, the people of the prince, breached the city's middle wall. And it talks about how, they destroyed the temple. Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman emperor. Notice how it says Jerusalem was destroyed by the Roman emperor Titus. Well, he didn't come in and, with the strength of his own hands, just tear down the walls in the city. No, he had his army. He was a commander and leader over his army. In the same way that the Antichrist is going to step foot into the temple, claim to be God, but it is going to be through his one world army that he gains full control. Notice this source. Titus was the one who destroyed Jerusalem and made it fall. But we know that it was him and his army, him and his people. Here's another source. Titus returned to Rome in 70 AD, conquered Jerusalem. Daniel 8. By who? By him, referring to the little horn, referring to Antiochus Epiphanes and his Seleucid empire, took away the daily sacrifice. Compare that to Daniel 9. See, God expects us. Read Daniel 7, read Daniel 8, read Daniel 9. So once you get to Daniel 9, you understand, oh, wow, the he who is causing the sacrifice and the oblation to cease takes us back to Daniel 8, where this Antichrist figure took away the daily sacrifice. Compared to Daniel 12, abomination that maketh desolate set up. It's an idol being set up. Here's Antiochus Epiphanes. He's the Seleucid king of the Hellenistic Syrian kingdom. He reigned from this time to this time. Notice how it says his attempts to suppress Judaism brought on the wars of the Maccabees, the Maccabean revolt. History confirms that Daniel 11 and Daniel 8 are dealing with Antiochus Epiphanes. Notice right here, the appetizer versus the end game. Antiochus Epiphanes fulfilled all of these things on a minor scale. End times Antichrist, he does the same things, but he does it on a grand scale. 2 Thessalonians 2, speaking about the future man of sin. He exalteth himself. He claims to be God. Daniel 11, referring to Antiochus Epiphanes, what did he do? He magnified himself above every god. We unearthed coins demonstrating that that was the case. Here's the last slide I want to get into, Revelation 13. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. Do you see how we have a shadow fulfillment or a localized fulfillment in 2nd century BC with Antiochus Epiphanes? He set up a statue of Zeus, history tells us. That statue couldn't speak. But notice the image in Revelation 13 that is set up. That image can speak. And whoever doesn't worship it will be killed. And so we have the end game. We have the grand finale with the Antichrist. Antiochus Epiphanes, he was only the appetizer, my friends. And again, I'll say it, and I'll end with this. History, context, and grammar refutes preterism. I yield.
Okay. Well, yeah. Definitely, can appreciate how, people could maybe take that as partial fulfillments, but I still have, unfortunately, 10 more points, so I'd love to go through those with you at some point in the future, but we can hold off on that for another day. What I'd like to end off the entirety of this discussion on is I love how you keep bringing up 2 Thessalonians 2, because 2 Thessalonians verses 1 through 2 inexplicably are referencing the same events of 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 18 or whatever, 13 through 19. But 1 Thessalonians 4 is referencing directly Matthew 24, and Matthew 24 is referencing directly Isaiah 27. And if you start, I could take you on a journey, my friend. I could take you on a giant journey through the Bible and what all these motifs are fully leading and culminating to. And it's not culminating to some third temple. Okay, there is no third temple in the Bible. I can go into timelines on that, how that doesn't make sense biblically. There is no singular Antichrist ever mentioned. There is no end times. There's only the time of the end. And it's the end of what? It's the end of the 490 years that God had appointed for Old Covenantal Jerusalem. So, it's, okay, you could say that history proves that, yes, these things have happened. I agree with you. You can, and I can get into those points about what Josephus says about the destruction and the timelines and all that good stuff. Those are part of my last 10 points.
Yeah, well, how about this? We'll wrap it up now, so we don't want to open up a whole new can of worms.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. So I appreciate the time, but I still feel that some of the most glaring illogical points that I brought up weren't really addressed. It just kind of goes back to partial fulfillments, shadows and types, and we need to bring Bible.
Well, no, it goes back to the existence or reality of shadow fulfillment, immediate fulfillments in their context, but also future literal and more dramatic fulfillments. But it also goes through history. I've never seen you address the 7-year Jewish-Roman War, 66 to 73, that occurs exactly as Daniel 9:27 explains. I've never seen you deal with the historical evidence for Antiochus Epiphanes being talked about in Daniel 8 and 11. I still haven't seen you deal with the grammar. Okay, so I offer to give you the last word. I've enjoyed this, but you're just going on and on and on, bringing up new points, making assertions. Leave it up to the audience, okay? I think the audience can see that you didn't deal with the grammar, you didn't deal with the history, and you didn't deal with the context.
Okay.
Do you believe that I want to end on this. Do you believe, after this discussion, do you believe that Daniel 8 and 11 are referring to Antiochus Epiphanes? Yes or no?
No.
Unbelievable. You know what? Leave that with the audience. And I mean, this is flat earth stuff right here. Okay? It's been a great discussion, but for you to not acknowledge the reality of Antiochus Epiphanes being described in Daniel 8 and Daniel 11 after this discussion, you've addressed none of the historical evidence. You've addressed none of the contextual evidence. It makes me wonder if you're actually looking into this in an objective manner.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely am. I don't think that Daniel 8 is talking about Greece. I believe it's talking about Rome. I think that's what's being brought into context.
No, it's talking about Greece.
Greece is in there with the 4 kingdoms. I agree.
Yeah.
But the little
And
horn.
out of one of the kingdoms, I showed you a historical source in my slideshow. Out of the Seleucid Empire came Antiochus Epiphanes, who came against the Jews and the one true God. And he did all the things described in Daniel 8. It's chronological. It fits like a glove. You want to say it's Rome for no reason.
Well, but Rome came out of one of those kingdoms as well, one of those 4 empires.
Well, we had Greece as your world empire at its time, followed by Rome, who was a world empire for its time.
Right, but when it was split into 4 different kingdoms, there was that kingdom that was where Rome came out of. That's what Rome did. They rose up and they started taking over these Grecian kingdoms over in Europe. So they were over there, but that's what that little horn represents. It points itself towards the east and the south and towards the glorious land. Well, it had to have come only from one kingdom, because if you look at a map...
So let me ask you this. Here's the last thing that we really got to wrap things up.
Okay.
Who's the one out of Rome that committed the abomination of desolation, claimed to be God, made a league, went to war against the Jews, worked deceitfully, came in... Who is that in Rome then?
So I would say, because it was Nero Caesar who started the war, I would say it would be Nero Caesar.
So Nero set up an image, a transgression of desolation.
So I do believe that would be in reference to Titus and his army going in there.
Yeah, but no image was set up.
That could be a whole other topic of discussion of what the image is and what it represents.
Did Titus claim to be God?
I couldn't say, but that's why I would say it would maybe go back to Nero Caesar.
Did Nero Caesar claim to be God?
Absolutely.
And did he set up an image?
That's, again, a whole other topic of discussion that could be brought into of what that means in reference to the start of the war.
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that. It's been a good discussion. I appreciate it. I enjoy these, and I feel like I could talk about it for another 2 hours. So we'll definitely do a part 2. No hard feelings. I do appreciate your zeal. I appreciate your passion, and it is enjoyable to discuss this with you because you've studied it out. And you bring some worthwhile points and arguments for us to engage, and so it makes it worth it. So I appreciate your time.
Yep, thank you.
Likewise, both of you gentlemen, it was a good discussion. We will be premiering this later. If you want to catch it on, I believe it'll be on SFT's channel. But yeah, look forward to it.